Hello and welcome to another Grow Together Food and Medicinal Gardens episode. Now in this episode I'm going to give you an update on all my indoor growing experiments, from the grow room to my converted airing cupboard. So we'll let you know how those turned out, and the mushroom growing I've been doing. And also I've been experimenting with cold exposure on me, not the plants, so I'll give you an update on that as well. Now you may remember back at episode 12 I showed you the setup for growing indoors that I'd been inspired to create after watching the Garden Like a Viking YouTube channel. So I got myself a grow tent, set that up and proceeded to grow various salad crops that I'd started in my polytunnel, and that all went pretty well, as well as some mushrooms. So then I converted my airing cupboard. Now that was a little bit flawed because I hadn't actually got the correct setup with the airflow, because I didn't want to bash a hole in the wall to put a proper extractor fan in. So my workaround was just to leave the door open about an inch or two with a decent fan to get the airflow. Where it failed was the lighting I had. I only got to 16,000 lumens, and when you consider the sun is 120,000, that was always going to be the issue, because what I wanted to achieve with this is to have it really, really low cost. And yes, everything germinated really well, but the growing of things, that you can see things are just getting a little bit spindly and leggy, and they're not really catapulting forward. And yes, okay, I snuck a lemon tree in. That was an experiment. And then it got so cold in my polythene tunnel that I had to bring the strawberries in as well that I'd got in hanging baskets. But all in all, it did and it didn't work. If I had got the correct lighting, it would have been brilliant. But I've now converted it back to an airing cupboard, sort of. It's also an infrared sauna now. But anyway, I'm sticking to growing in the grow tent, which is the purpose built. But if I ever had to grow food in the airing cupboard, then I could just get more high-powered lights. So yes, it did work, but you definitely need to spend a lot more money on the lighting, and then of course your electricity goes up with the higher wattage, so you need to weigh up what it is that you're going to grow and whether it's worth the time, the effort and the extra expense. For me, the wheatgrass grew really well, but I really struggle to want to be juicing at this time of year, even though I know it's incredibly healthy. So that's why I've just now gone back to the grow tent. So as you know, I've been following along with Nate Murray's Garden Like a Viking channel, where he's been teaching many things, but one of the things is on mushrooms. So I started off with the simple grow kits and had great success with that. And then he taught us how to actually inoculate a substrate ourselves. And that is a bit of a faff, I must admit, but I was still willing to give it a go. So you have to basically boil up some straw for an hour to make sure it is sterile, and then you pop it in a sterile bucket and then you add in your mushroom spawn. And these are my first ones that have come up. So you can see here we've got some beautiful blue oyster mushrooms, although they are sort of a grey colour, but that's what they are. And they start out, you can see these tiny little things. Well, actually, let me show you this one. I don't know if you're able to see in there. I'll bring it over. There's some tiny little pin heads forming. Then they pop out, they're really tiny. Then you get that. And then after about 4 or 5 days, you get this. So these are ready now. So I'm going to harvest these today. And then, yeah, hopefully they'll be as delicious as the yellow oyster, because they're by far my favourite so far. But yes, just the weight of these, when you grow your own, the quality of them, the texture, the flavour, it just really is incredible. I've just pulled one section off, and they are absolutely delicious when cooked with garlic butter. So it's definitely worth going to the effort. But yeah, the weight of them, it's just so different to anything that you could buy in the shops. But yeah, growing your own mushrooms, the difference in flavour is incredible. The lion's mane hasn't come up yet, but I'm hoping that will. I've left that at my parents' house because their house is considerably warmer than mine is, which leads me on to my experiments with cold exposure that I've been doing. A couple of years ago, I read the book, where is it? This one. My Water Cure by Sebastian Kneipp, I think that's how you pronounce his surname, and he was a Bavarian pastor from the 1800s that cured thousands of people of all sorts of ailments purely by using cold water in specific places and some herbal remedies, but mostly it was using the cold water that did the cures, and he became famous all over the world because of this, and people trekked to Bavaria to go through the treatments. And basically he nearly died himself, and he'd read a book from I think the 1600s that had mentioned how beneficial cold water was, so they'd basically sent him home to die. I can't remember what he'd actually got. Might have been typhoid. I can't remember. Anyway, they sent him home to die, but he'd read this book, so he thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to die anyway. So he hurled himself into one of the freezing rivers, and bit by bit, he got better. So then he sort of studied it a bit more and tested lots of things on himself and came up with his water cure. And basically, the philosophy behind it is the stagnation of the blood. That's what he believed caused all sorts of ailments. So if the blood stagnated anywhere in the body, I mean, you know what water's like when it sits and stagnates, it goes yucky. So this basically forces the body, the cold water, the shock of it, blood vessels contract with the cold, and then as soon as you're out of the cold and warm again, they dilate, and then the blood flow really comes through. And Wim Hof, of course, is the modern day equivalent, but some of his things can be pretty brutal, whereas the Sebastian Kneipp's way of doing it was he would do very specific cold treatments, so you wouldn't necessarily have to put your entire body into cold water, although that is very beneficial. But if you're in a poor state of health, that's going to be too much of a shock to the system. So I tested some of his last year because I'd been doing a little bit of Wim Hof for, I don't know, probably the last 10 years. And when I say a little bit, I mean the occasional cold shower. And then that's like, no, I've had enough now. But the last 3 years, I have been doing it more every winter with a lot more enthusiasm isn't the right word, dedication. But last year, having read Sebastian's book, that sort of, I found that was more beneficial than what I'd seen from Wim Hof because of how he goes into the details of how specific diseases were caused by various stagnations and what he did to relieve it. And one thing I found very interesting in his book was he talks about the first-hand experience of watching the fashions change and what he considered unnecessary pampering when people started wearing scarves and woolen hats and gloves. And because that wasn't the trend of the time, mostly because the people in the area were so poor they couldn't afford them. And he noticed the changes in people's health, how suddenly by wrapping the throat up, they were coming down with all sorts of catarrh and sore throats and laryngitis. And his belief was that it was very important to expose the throat particularly to the cold, so that when you're breathing in the cold air, you haven't suddenly got the cold, ice cold air coming into a chamber that's suddenly very, very hot. And then that difference, he said, was causing catarrhs and all sorts of build-ups and sore throats, etc. So he was alive and witnessed what the change in fashion did to people's health. So his recommendation was you didn't wrap the head up unless it was absolutely bitterly. And even if you did have to wrap it, it was the minimum amount you could put on. You never used wool. You never overheated the top portion of your body. So as someone who is very prone to headaches, if I get my head colder than the rest of my body, I was a bit sort of, I don't know about this, but I tried it, and yeah, it did trigger a few headaches, but after a while I actually found that I've got much better. And by doing the cold water treatments as well, I've been able to get much tougher, much hardier, and I've noticed huge improvements in vitality. My morning routine is like the Wim Hof breathing when I first wake up, and then straight downstairs and straight into a tub of ice cold water. And yes, you certainly feel invigorated by the end of it. My little assistant always comes for moral support and looks at me every morning like, are you quite all right? Are you mad? She looks into the bucket and can see, yeah, that looks cold. Why are you in there? But anyway, you certainly feel very, very alive. There is no, in this house, there is no, oh, I feel groggy having just woken up. No, I am wide awake at the end of this, and you feel incredible. And what Wim Hof talks about is you've got 125,000 kilometres of capillaries in your body. That's 80,000 miles of capillaries. And they need that exercise. They need to be forced into the cold and then the hot, because it's like a muscle, that pumping action. If your capillaries are working well, it's less strain on the heart. And of course, it's getting rid of all the stagnation that Sebastian Kneipp talks about in his books. So it really does. I've noticed the difference massively. Before Christmas, I was able to not wear a hat up till freezing. As soon as it got freezing, migraine triggered. But since I've been doing the full submersion in the cold water, I say full, I'm a bit wimpy about putting my arms in, but the rest of me's in. This morning it was -3 when I got in. I do feel terrific afterwards. So getting that flush of blood right through the system, I'm now able to walk out at -3, don't need a hat, doesn't trigger a headache anymore. And I've noticed this month no migraines. I can get hormonal migraines, and I know there's lots of different causes of migraines, but for me personally, oftentimes they can be liver related, and then when you get that hormonal shift, it's like it's one thing too much for the body and it can trigger a migraine. So I'm very prone to that. And this month, nothing. Fantastic. I am over the moon. But the energy it releases and the dopamine, I mean, it's 2 minutes of hell. It's not pleasant, and it's more of a mental battle than it is physical, to be honest. And I'm amazed. I've done this nearly every day for the last 3 weeks, because now I've got my own home, I can have a decent sized tub rather than the baby tub that I had beforehand. So as you can see, the tub is not really built for this. It's to have proper reinforced plastic that can take the water, you're looking at £200, whereas this was £20 from QD stores. But it does the job. It doesn't matter that it bows. It does the job. Now, of course, you don't have to do this outside. I just prefer it. You could always do a cold shower, but I actually find those worse. I find them excruciating, because some of you's in the cold and some of you isn't. And I find it much harder to force myself to do a cold shower, whereas with a big container like a bath or a tub, I can get in and your body temperature normalizes more quickly. It's actually worse doing showers. And the reason I don't do a cold bath is because you just can't get it as cold as you can outside. Now, and obviously you're having to get rid of the water every day, whereas with this method I'm just putting chlorine dioxide and a couple of charcoal blocks in there so that, you know, there's nothing yucky in the water. And if you want to see more on chlorine dioxide, then look at episode 13, where I went into its first aid and numerous benefits. Obviously, you do need to be a little bit careful, so this is not medical advice because I'm still not a doctor, especially if you've got a heart condition, and as we know, a lot of people do these days, because it can be too much of a shock to the system. So, you know, I didn't get that tub, fill it up, and the next day, Geronimo! The first couple of days, I just knelt in it. That was more than enough, came up to sort of my midriff, and I can get in a lot quicker now, and I'm, you know, not wanting to scream the place down. Not that I have, because I don't want the neighbours looking out the window wondering what on earth I'm doing. So that's why it's nicely tucked behind the solar panel so people can't see me first thing in the morning. But yeah, it's getting easier, and each day I just get more and more vitality from the process. So yeah, it's I can definitely recommend it, but do be careful and do take any pre-existing medical conditions into account if you're going to try it. But yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled. No migraines, so long may it continue. And although I'm doing this for health reasons, one of the nice side effects is that I'm able to have the heating much lower. When I first started doing this 3 winters ago, I remember I was in Italy and the temperature was cranked up to 24 degrees and I was still feeling cold inside. Now my thermostat is down to 16 degrees. Now my comfort zone is 18 degrees, but it's at 16. And now I'm hoping to set it to 14 eventually, but it saved me an absolute fortune this year. So that's been a nice side effect, as is getting physically stronger and feeling more vital as you age to feel better than I did when I was in my 20s. And you know, I eat a very good diet and I don't drink and I don't smoke and all that good stuff, but to have something that can take you to the next level so easily is really fabulous. So having spent nearly half a century being a cold weather Wimp Hof, if I can turn myself into a cold weather Wim Hof, then I think anybody can. So I hope this inspires you to give it a go too. So there you go. Consider yourself updated with all of my experiments. So take good care and enjoy the cold while we have it. So until next time, bye-bye.